Welcome. In this video, we'll learn how to make a web quiz using HTML for the structure, CSS for the style, and JavaScript to make it all work, to take your answers, score the quiz, and then return a result. So let's have a look at my finished product here. So it says, how well do you know European handball? And if we scroll down, it has 3 questions. Question 1, how many players are on the court for each team? So I know that's 7. How long is each half? I know that's 30 minutes. And which country won both the men's and the women's handball gold medal at the 2020 Olympics? So I happen to know that's France, but I'm going to select Denmark, who are a very good handball country. But I wanted to get at least one wrong, so when we submit the answers, we'll see what happens. And it says you got 67% correct, so it's done the calculations there. So for your quiz, as we go along in the video, I will show you how to do the coding, but you can choose a completely different topic, choose something that you know a lot about or you're interested in or passionate about. You can choose different fonts, different colors, different images, different questions, different number of questions, etc. I'll just show you the basics of how the code works. For this project, we will use the wonderful online code playground called JSFiddle, which lets you write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code and see the results over in a window this side. If you haven't used it before, you can click sign in and there is a sign up option there. You can create with a username and password, create an account. Once you've signed up or signed in settings, please just make sure that you've selected tabs with columns in brackets. That means that it'll be set up the same way that I have it set up, and so it'll be less confusing as you follow along. Just a couple of things about JSFiddle. Up the top here, I've got it hidden, but you can see that there's a web address. Whenever you hit save, the number on the end of that will be added to. So it might be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And what that means is that every single version of your website that you've created or your web page will be saved in memory, and that's called version control. At the end of it, you might wish to click set as base, and that will make your final version the one with no number on the end that you can share. Also, at any time, you can type a /show on the end of the URL at the top, and you'll see your web page in all its full page glory. All right, let's get started. I think I'm actually going to get the body of the website set up before we add the quiz part and all of the logic. So let's get the basic page with the heading and the image and everything looking nice as a first step. So I'm going to start with a heading, and I'd like it to be a large heading, so I'll use the H1 tag. I'm going to put that all in one line, and I will put my heading there. And if I run that, you can see it's up the top there, which is good. And the second thing I will do is I'm going to get an image, and I would like the image to be of my topic. Obviously, you should go and find an image from your topic, and your heading should also reflect your topic, which hopefully is different to mine. I'm going to go and get my image from Pixabay, which is fantastic for royalty-free images. Although as this is a practice project, you could just go and find an image on Google as well if you wish. So once you're in here, if you right-click and say copy image address, and then paste the address inside the quotation marks here, and you'll see that there is the image. Now the image here is much too big, so we can put inside the tag here, but after the address, width equals, and I'm going to say 100%. So now if I hit run, you'll see it takes up 100% of the body there, which looks a lot better. Now, right now, this gets bigger as we drag it bigger, but I'm going to limit the body to a section in the middle in a minute. In fact, let's go and sort those things out now. So if we go into the CSS and we can type in body here, and I'm going to add a few styling elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is limit the width of the body of the web page to be 750 pixels. So now, if I drag it wider, you'll see it doesn't get any bigger. But I want it to be in the middle of this page, no matter how wide it is. So the way that we make all of this margin on the right-hand side be automatically distributed evenly each side, we do that by saying margin auto. So now the body of the web page will be in the middle there. Let's choose a nice background color for the body. Now remember, for background colors, you can go to color picker. You can just Google color picker and you can choose a background color that you think fits your particular quiz. And remember, hopefully you've got your own topic. Now for a background color, it's probably a good idea to do one that's quite light, which is up to the top here. If you've got black text, if you've got white text on your page, you might go quite dark. The other thing though is I suggest that you make your color for the background quite desaturated. So if I go left here, you'll see that it looks more and more washed out. And the reason that I want that is because I don't want the background to take the viewer's attention. I want what we put on top of the background to take the viewer's attention. Once you've got the color that you like, you can hit copy here. Okay, so I'm going to paste mine in there and hit save. And as you can see, that's a very light washed out color that just adds a little bit of style to the page, but it doesn't make it look overly distracting. Now, I'd like to actually go for a bit of a two-tone effect here, where we have the left and the right outside the edges of where our content is be a slightly darker color. And the way I can do that is a higher element up in the tree than body is HTML. And if I make the HTML color a little bit darker, which I will put in here, and then hit save, you can now actually see which part of this is in the HTML and which part of this is considered to be the body. So the body in the middle has this lighter color, and the HTML as a background in total has this darker color. And it actually makes me realize that for the body here, I might actually want a little bit of padding, which is inside the border here between that and the content. So inside body here, if I type padding, and I will just try 10 pixels and see how that works. And that's actually looking much, much better. And there will be more content here, so it will push down as we go along. It won't still have this issue where there's this lower section with nothing there. So I'm quite happy with that two-tone effect. I would like the font to be probably a different font. So I will say font family. And I'm just going to go with a simple font for the main fonts. I'll change the heading font later probably, but for the moment I might just say Verdana, which is a web-safe font. If you look up web-safe fonts, they're generally fonts that are built into all the browsers that you can use without worrying about it. But for some reason, if the browser can't find it, we put a backup font, which is either going to be sans serif, serif, monospace, or cursive. I'm going to say serif. I'll make this a bit smaller. So now hopefully this should have gone to a sans serif font. Now another thing I would like is I would like this heading to be centered in the middle, but I would like everything else on the web page is actually going to be left aligned. Now this image here is always going to take up 100%, so we don't have to worry about the alignment of that. But the quiz down there is going to be left aligned. So how do I just set this section to be centered? Well, what I can do is the HTML in the H1 tag, I can actually put this inside a little div, and I can give it a class, and I can call the class maybe centered. And I will put the heading inside there. And that so far won't affect anything. Using the word centered didn't change anything. I just chose that because it's something that I would instantly know the purpose of this class. And then in the CSS, to access everything from that class, I can say dot centered, and I can say text align center. And hopefully now the heading will be in the middle, but nothing else will, unless I also give it this class. I think the last thing before we get into the quiz part of the website here is I would like to have a nice font for the heading. And for that, I'm going to go to Google Fonts. So if you search for Google Fonts and then go to the first result there, you can see that there are all sorts of fonts that you can scour through and try and find one that matches your particular topic, whatever it is that you're doing. You can choose whether you want just serif fonts or sans serif fonts, etc. And there are other ways of narrowing your search, or you can just browse through. My one was something called Audio Wide that I found before, which looks like this. And if you wanted to see what your heading would look like, you can put it in the box here, and you can test out with your specific text what that font would look like. Okay, so if I select that, and I click on select here, you'll see that it will actually give us the code here that we can put on our website. If we go to the @import section here, now we don't need the style tags because we're already putting it into a CSS file, but if I take the bits inside here and go Control-C, and then right up the top I can say Control-V, that will import that font, and now we can use it for our heading, which is our H1. So I will say H1 font family, and it is, you can see up here, family equals audio wide. So audio wide. Now what font, if for some reason it doesn't load, I want to fall back onto just basic sans serif family. Let's test that out. Okay, and as you can see, that's showing up quite nicely. I don't actually like it going onto a second line there necessarily, so I may actually just make the font size a little bit smaller. So I could say font size is something like 50 pixels or something like that, like I have in some other projects, which is much too big. 30 pixels, that's probably about right. But there's also another unit of measure that we can use, which is EM. So I might say I'd like the font size to be 1.7, and I've played around with this before, so you can play around too. 1.7 EM, which is basically 1.7 times bigger than sort of the standard font on the page. And I think the default for an H1 heading is about 2 EM. Now the advantage of using EM is that it scales really nicely in people who have different zoom settings in their browser and things like that. So that's why I'm using that one there. Okay, I'm happy with that. It's centered, it doesn't go over the edge, it's in a nice font, and I think everything's looking good and ready for the quiz part. Okay, like I said before, the quiz is going to be made out of what we call an HTML form. So a form is something that just allows the user to respond to questions, enter data, that sort of thing. So I'm going to make a new form here with a button. And then inside it, I can put some headings for the questions in an H2, for example. I might put that all on one line. So my first question, and hopefully you've thought about what your questions are, but my first question I've thought about, and you can always change this as you go along, it doesn't necessarily matter. There's my first question. How many players are on the court for each team? Actually, H2 is a little bit big for that. I might actually try H3. Okay, that's looking a little bit better, I think. So underneath this here, I'll just tab this in because it's inside the form. So underneath this, I would like to have 4 multiple choice answers. Now, a multiple choice type circle that you can select one out of the several types is basically, it's called a radio button in HTML. So let's do that. So it's a type of input, or it is an input tag, and the type equals radio. Then we close the tag and we type what we would like to say on it, and then we need to break to the next line. Actually, let's not break. Let's just show you how this works. So I'll copy that one. I'll put 6 on the next one. 6. And if I hit save, you'll see that we actually have a radio button here, and then the word 5, which appears next to it, and then a radio button here and the word 6. Now I would like each of these to be on a new line, so I'm just going to type break here. Oops. And break here. And now, hopefully, you'll see that they've been put down on the line like that. So if I had another 2 of these that said 5, 6, 7, and 8, like this, there we've got our first question, and then you'll see here that I can actually select these. Now, one of the problems here is that I can actually select all of them, and the reason for that is we haven't really given enough information here. If we give them all the same name, so let's say Q1, and I will copy and paste this across all of them. And I will rerun that. You'll see now that because they all have the same name, then the CSS knows that this is actually all part of the same question, and you should only be able to select one of them. Another thing that we'll need to do for marking purposes later on is to give each of these buttons a value. And this will be so that when one of them is selected, our code will know which one has been selected. That's very important later on. So the value, I'm just going to keep track of whether the user selected A, B, C, or D. I think that's a pretty simple way of doing that. So we'll say this is B, and if we copy and paste this, okay, so now when I select 7 here, the CSS will keep track that actually the C has been selected, and that will be very helpful when we're marking things later. Okay, so I just paused the video there for a second to include a few more questions for me. And obviously you don't need to watch the video for this, you can just copy and paste, and you can choose as many questions as you like for your quiz. And make sure that you mix up the order in which the answer is the correct one. So I've got the C being the correct answer here, and then B being the correct answer here, and A being the correct answer. So try and make it random, not always the same one. And the final thing I've done is just a little bit of a break at the end to have a little bit more space down here, so it's not pushing up against the bottom border there. So now if we look at this quiz here, we can select the correct answer for each one. But what we're missing is a button at the bottom to submit the answers. So let's go and have a look at that now. So it's still inside the form tag here because the button is part of the form. That's very important. We are going to do another input here, but this is not going to be a radio type button. This is going to be of type submit. Okay, and if we hit save, you'll see we have a button down the bottom here. Now it has some default text here, but we might just actually say with the value, we might call it submit answers so that it says something a little bit more meaningful on it. But unfortunately, a couple of things go wrong. Not only does it not work, but the page reloads and we get an error message here, which is not ideal. So we will fix all of those things a little bit later. I'll hit run again. But for the moment, we're just trying to set up the HTML side of things to be working correctly. Now, the final thing is underneath the submit answers part and outside of the form, I would actually like to just put an area where our score is going to be put afterwards. Now, I might copy and paste this to save a tiny bit of time, but I've basically just made a new div, and inside I just said your score will appear here. And I have to give it an ID, and I've just called it score, but you could call it score section or whatever you like. But I have to give it an ID because later on our code, our JavaScript code, will actually replace this text with the actual score that the person has got on the quiz. And as you can see, it says your score will appear here. Okay, we might just do a little bit of CSS styling for our form before we get all of the marking and everything working correctly. Our section down here that was ID score, the way that we get that an ID section is with the hashtag. And the problem that I have is simply that it needs space above it. That's the main thing. So I'm going to say margin top, and I'm going to say 10 pixels. We'll just try that. It's reasonable. We might actually do a tiny bit more. We'll say 15. Okay, so we've got a little bit of space there. And we might actually do a margin bottom of 20 pixels as well, so that there's some space at the bottom of the page for us. Okay, also I think here I would like this to be bold, otherwise it sort of swims into the background a little bit. So I will say font weight bold. And then you can see that's looking a little bit better. Another thing I don't really like at this stage is I think the submit answers button, the text on it is too small. And I don't really have the best way of getting that particular element off the page. So what I might do here is actually add an ID to the input button. And I'll just say ID equals sub. Again, you can make the ID whatever you want as long as it matches up with your CSS. And then I can say here that I would like the font size. Again, we'll use EM, 1 EM, because it looks like it's actually a little bit smaller than the regular text, which is 1 EM. So let's see if that works. Yes, and you can see this is a little bit bigger. Now you can style this in however you like, put any other CSS there, but I'm quite happy with that format for the moment. I think that looks reasonably good. All right, let's get into the most interesting and exciting part of this video, which is how we code the logic to mark our quiz. Now, remember the HTML is the content on the page, the CSS is the style, what things look like, how they behave, and the JavaScript is for if you actually need to do some computer programming. So if you need the code to actually run some actions here. So when we hit submit answers, we need several things to happen. We need the JavaScript to work out whether each answer was correct or false, and then count up the number of correct answers, and then work out what percentage that is of the quiz, and then replace this text with the score for the quiz. So let's get in how we would do that. So let's go back to the HTML here and make a few changes. So the form that we made before, we need to give it an ID so the code will know what we're talking about for later. So I'll say quiz form. And we need to give it a value called onSubmit. And that means which JavaScript function are we going to run when the submit button is pressed. And I'm going to make a function called markQuiz. I haven't made it yet, but we will make it. And we're going to put the word event in there because what happens is we run this function and we pass the event, which is the button being pressed, to the function. So the function has lots of information about the button that just got pressed. So let's go ahead over to the JavaScript here, and let's make our mark quiz function. So just like other programming languages like Python, for example, you can make a function which is just a block of code that can be called by some other part of the program, i.e. the HTML over there, and run at some point, i.e. when the button gets pressed. So let's make sure it has the same name here. Okay. All right, so we've got our function here, mark quiz. The function will be written between these curly braces. Now, the first thing that we want this function to do is to stop the page reloading, because when we hit submit down here, you might notice that it actually reloads the page, which is great if you need it to, and you need it to send the information to a server and then send new information back. But we're not doing that, so we need to prevent that default behavior. And the way that we do that is we type in event dot, which is the event, this button submission event that's being passed to us. We need to say event dot prevent default. And what that will do is hopefully when we hit submit answers, you'll see that it has not reloaded the page. Nothing happened, which is good because we didn't want that to happen. Now, just a quick note on the JavaScript here. If you have done JavaScript before, if you haven't, don't worry, I'll show you how to do each part here. But if you have done JavaScript before, you might say, why am I not putting semicolons on the end? In some languages, you have to. In JavaScript, the interpreter will actually automatically put them on the end. So a lot of style guides suggest not actually putting them on the end, and I'm going to be consistent with that here. All right, so this is a comment, 2 forward slashes. This is just a note of the things that we need to do. So first of all, we're going to unpack the user answers. We're then going to check if the quiz is complete, because if somebody tries to click submit answers before they've selected an answer for every question, we don't want to actually mark the quiz. We want to let them know that they have to answer all the questions. And then we want to calculate the score. Okay. And the final thing is display the result. So let's go through these things. This might, if you haven't done JavaScript before, this might seem a little bit complicated, but hopefully if you can type along with me, things will start to make a little bit more sense as we go along. Let's start by doing console.log, which is a little bit like print in some languages such as Python. So it's going to print some debug information for us down into the console here. So I would actually like to just print the event that comes into here. If we click submit answer, oh, okay, I forgot to put quotation marks around here. Okay, so if we go back into the JavaScript here and save, hopefully if we click submit answer, okay. So you can see that the event, which is the button press that's being passed into this function, contains just an absolutely insane amount of information. Just absolutely insane amount of information. We don't need all of that information. We only need very, very specific things. Okay, so let's make a variable. In JavaScript, you do that by the let keyword. So let answer q1. So I've again made up, this is just a variable name that I've made up. And a variable is just a name that you can store a piece of information in. Now you could have called this q1 answer, you could have called it q1 info, whatever. I've just made up the name answer for q1. So we're going to say document.querySelector. What that means is go and fetch from the document, which is the whole screen, the first input that you can find that has the name q1. Okay, so if you go back here, the first input that has the name q1, so there are 4 of them, but that also is checked, which means selected. So for example, if the user had chosen 8, the first one marked q1 that they could find that is checked would be 8. There's only going to be one. So this piece of code here will go and find the data for this particular input and store it in Q1. And again, if we were to say console.log answer Q1, again, this is much more information than we actually need. If I clear the console here and click submit, or maybe I'll hit save first, sorry. So if I select 8, go down here and click submit, again, you'll see that there is just an insane amount of stuff that belongs to this particular event. What we want is, you might be able to see here, is actually the value. So later on, we're going to be using answer q1.value like that. And if we print that, you can see if I select 5 and click submit, then it shows, oh, the user selected option A. If we selected option D, it would say D down there. Okay, so we're going to be using answer q1.value in a minute. Okay, now we're going to need to do these, I can copy and paste for all 3 of my questions. So this will be question Q2, which will be, I'll change it to a 2 here, and to a 3 here, and to a 3 here as well. So just a reminder, what's happening is that it's basically going and getting the specific input here that was checked, okay? So the next thing we need to do is check if the quiz is complete. Now, the way that we can do that is, I just want to show you an example of what answer Q3 will look like if we don't answer it. So let's go down here, we'll save that, and I will answer the first 2, but I won't answer the final one. And in the console, let's see what the information is like for the 3rd one if we hit submit answers. Can you see it just says null? Because we said go and find, for Q3 here, the first input here that has the name Q3 and is also checked or selected. Now, that doesn't exist, so the answer here is null. So what we can say over here is we can say, if, I'll just put this inside, sorry. So if all 3 of these actually exist, this is a bit of a shortcut. It sort of means, equals something, actually, actually exists. So if answer Q1 and answer Q2 and answer Q3 all actually exist, if they're something, then we're going to, oops, I'll put this above it. Then we're actually going to mark the quiz, but we're going to have an else here, which is, what are we actually going to do if that's not the case? So what are we going to do if one of these or multiple of these have not been answered? So in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to make a pop-up alert on the screen for the user. And I will put that in here. So I just said, alert, please answer all the questions before submitting. And what that looks like, if I close the console, is it should come down from the top here. And it says at the top of the page, please answer all the questions before submitting. Okay. Now, there is another way that we could do that later, is we could actually have it appear down here instead of the score, but that might be a little bit of an extension for you to work out yourself. I'm just going to do it like this in a simple way. Okay, but if it is actually the case that all 3 of these questions have an answer, then we want to calculate the score, and we would like to display the result. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to make a new variable called score. Again, I just made up that name, but try and name things that make sense, and we're going to set the score to 0. Now, if answer Q1 up here, dot value, remember this will be either A, B, C, or D, equals 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 in JavaScript checks to see whether it equals that, and 3 equals instead of 2 equals is a very long story, but basically 2 equals does work, but it has some problems. So a little bit later in the language, they added the 3 equals, which works a little bit better. So we're going to use that one. I'm not going to dive into it, but it's a bit safer to use. So my correct answer for question 1 was C. So I'm going to say if the answer, the value of the question 1 answer from the user is C, in that case, we would like to add on to the score 1 point. So we can say score plus equals 1. And we can copy and paste this several times, making sure we use a new if every time. Please don't use else if or something like that, because we need to check all 3 of them independently. So if the answer of Q2, I think mine was B, please make sure you get these correct, otherwise your quiz won't work. And my Q3 answer was A. Okay, so we should be able to have a score there. Now we can test this by saying again console.log, and we can just check the score. So let's do that. I'm going to deliberately get, again, the first 2 correct and the last one wrong, and submit the answers. And then in the console it says 2. So that's correct. We got 2 correct. Now, how would we turn that into a percentage? Well, I'm going to make a new variable, and I will call that percentage. And the way that I would do that is just say score divided by 3, which is the number of questions that I have. If you had 10 questions, you would divide it by 10, and then we times it by 100 to get the percentage. I don't want long strings of decimals, I just want the whole number. So I can put all of this in a math.round function. And hopefully this will work. Now, how do we display that result? So we actually want to replace this text here. Your score will appear here. Now, if we go back to the HTML, you'll see that it has an ID of score. So we can say document, which is the whole web page, dot get element by ID. Just be careful, the D is actually lowercase there, even though ID is an acronym, and in real life it would both be uppercase, so just be careful. So get element by ID, score. And then we can say dot inner HTML equals. So we can actually set the HTML to be whatever we like. And I would like to set it to a string that says you got, and then I'm going to add onto that the percentage variable. Now when I try and add something to a string in JavaScript, it will just convert the percentage to a string and join them together in a sentence, which is what we want. Plus, we want to say percentage correct. So hopefully that will work. We will test it out. I'll click save. And again, I'll select, well, this time I might get just the 1 correct. And it says you got 33% correct. So that seems to work, which is good. So that's basically everything. If you haven't done much JavaScript before, this really might seem overwhelming, so I'm going to put it all on the screen here so you can carefully copy, and I will explain just as we go through what it does. So just a reminder, all of this is one function, which is, imagine it's just a block of code, that can be run at a particular time. Now, the time that it gets run is in the form's on submit. So when the button is pressed, this quiz gets run. This mark quiz event function gets run, and it gets handed the event of the button being clicked. Now, this includes all sorts of information, just hundreds of lines of information about the form. And so after we've prevented it loading a new page, which we don't want, what we do is we extract out the answer to question 1, question 2, and question 3, which again is just a huge amount of information, which is more than what we want. But if it's empty, then we know to run the code down here, which is to say an alert, please answer all the questions. We then make a new variable of score equaling 0, and if the value, which will be A, B, C, or D, is correct for any particular question, we add 1 point onwards. We then make a new empty variable or blank variable called percentage, which we calculate the percentage in. And the final thing that we do is we get the score element down the bottom here and replace the HTML with you got whatever the percentage is and percentage correct. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, this is the basic quiz. You could change it in so many ways. You can choose a different topic, you can have different fonts, different colors, different image, different questions, more questions, etc. You might like to style this button down here differently. And one thing that you may like to do is, instead of having that alert at the top, you may like to actually change the text in this box if you hit submit answers. Now, that wouldn't be that hard if you just go into the JavaScript here. Instead of calling alert, maybe you could use this get element by ID and write it in there. So that might be something that you could do. Don't forget that if you save and then click set as base, then you'll get a nice URL without all of the numbers at the end for the version. And if you type /show on the end, you'll be able to see your web page full screen that you can share with somebody else. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you in a future video.